So before I begin, how many of you are from long lines of Adventists? I'd say 3 generations or more. Just pop your hands up. Okay. How about 2 generations of Adventists? How many of you are the first generation? Okay, I'm going to raise my hand there as well. This morning, I'd like to share with you a little bit my journey with Adventism and how I ended up here today. So, my parents hated the public school that I was in. And one day my mom just said, I'm tired of it, I've had enough, and you're going to another school. And I was in 5th grade. I have a 5th grader right there, Devontae, who's waving his hand. Thank you, Devontae, for helping out. And so I went to this new school. And I looked around, and the kids looked normal, but they didn't talk normal. They said things like, Happy Sabbath, and they didn't go to church on Sunday. Everybody goes to church on Sunday. I grew up going to church on Sunday. They ate Wham and Stripples and gluten, and I'm like, what is wrong with you people? Now, I grew up as a Boy Scout, and they said, oh, yeah, we have Boy Scouts, and they're explaining it to me, and I'm thinking, no, those aren't Boys. Well, they are kind of like Boy Scouts. I mean, you learn to tie knots, and you go camping and stuff, but you guys don't go collect candy at Halloween. You collect cans. Amen. And I found out they were Pathfinders. So I thought Adventists were pretty weird at the time. I thought, wow, you guys you're nice and all, but wow, you're kind of kooky. Is what I thought. So I ended up going to high school. I went to a boarding school my junior and senior year. And when I was there, I met a person named Mr. Meyer. Now, the reason I met him, when you go to boarding school, you need to work. I had to work. And if you were lucky, you got a nice cushy job where you were in the office with a nice air conditioning, answering phones. Hi, good morning, Mount Pisgah Academy. How may I direct your call? I didn't get to do that. I was out mowing lawns, pulling grass, raking, and of course it's 200 degrees in July in North Carolina. Felt like 200 degrees anyway. And so I'm out there working along, and I got to work with Mr. Meyer. Now, Mr. Meyer was a really nice guy. He was the maintenance person, and he was great and all, but I thought he was kind of weird too. Well, one day, I got to see a side of Mr. Meyer that really opened my eyes towards him. So what would happen is he would drive the truck around and drop off lawnmowers, and then we boys were out there mowing the grass. And at the end of the day, at the end of our work period, he would come along and pick up the mowers. So he picked up mine, and I'm riding in the truck with him. And as we were approaching our second location, a friend of mine was running across the field. And as he was running, he was tearing off his clothes. And he was swearing loudly. And my eyes got really big. I'm watching it, and Mr. Meyer looked over at me, and he said, well, now there's something you don't see every day. So we drove over, and we found out that he had run over a nest of yellow jackets. Yeah, not good. So we got him to the nurse, and he's all swollen, and he's crying. And he said, Mr. Meyer, I'm sorry for all the cussing. And Mr. Meyer, with a twinkle in his eye, looked at him, and he put his hand around him. He said, son, there are some times where all shucks just doesn't quite cut it. And he said, you know, had I been there with you, I definitely would have been running and probably speaking in strange tongues too. And here I am, I'm looking at this guy, and I'm thinking, here's a guy at a Christian school, a teacher at a Christian school, who admitted that he probably might have said the occasional naughty word being stung by a nest of yellow jackets. I thought, I'm going to have to keep my eye on him, you know? Wow. Well, he had a wife, Mrs. Meyer, and she was a cook at the school, and everyone loved when she cooked. There were 2 cooks there, and everyone loved Mrs. Meyer. And she was a fluffy lady, and she would give you a nice big hug, and she looked like the stereotypical grandma, and we all loved her. We loved her very, very much. And she always had a big smile, and she had Bible studies. She and Mr. Meyer had Bible studies, and they invited me to come. Well, I would have normally said, no, thank you. I'd been polite about it, but would have said, no, I'd really rather not. However, I really did like the Meyers. and they had a daughter. Yeah, she was quite lovely. She was quite old. She was quite a bit older than the rest of us, but hope springs eternal. So myself and my other friends, we went to the Myers Bible studies. And spending time with the Myers and going to these Bible studies, it really showed me that not all Seventh-day Adventists were weird. He was, amen. Here's a guy who loved the Lord, was into regular guy stuff, and was a Seventh-day Adventist. And I can tell you, and I was ultimately baptized through these Bible studies that I had with them. And I can tell you, I would not be a Seventh-day Adventist today. And I certainly wouldn't be up front directing kids here at this church if it weren't for godly people like the Myers. Church, God had a plan. So I graduated and I went to Southern. Now it's Southern Adventist University. When I was there, it was Southern College. And I studied biology for no real reason other than I was good at it. I was always good in science, and I figured, well, hey, I can study science exclusively, and, we'll see what the future holds. So there I was taking my science classes, and on Christmas break, we left, and we came back, and I went to my supervising professor. At the time, it was Dr. Nairati, and I went in with him to plan out the next semester, and I sat down, and we had some small talk, and he was looking around for his folder. He was looking around, and I said, Doctor, what's wrong? And he said, I don't have your folder anymore. Your things have been transferred. What do you mean transferred? He said, hold on, let me make some phone calls. And he called down to the administration building, and there he discovered that my plans and my file had been transferred to the music department. Now, the interesting thing is, before I went on Christmas break, I began to have the thought in my mind that I really should switch to music and not stay with science. And it persisted in my mind. I didn't tell a soul, no one. So I go on Christmas break, I come back, and my file is moved. So we did a little more checking around, and all of my science classes had been dropped. Now, for those of you who know, you can't just drop a class. They keep tight controls on college students because of the amount of money that's involved and make sure everybody's on task. And so all my science classes were dropped, and all of my music classes had been added. And they had been figured out in the proper sequence so that I could get to everyone. And here's the kicker. There were signatures from the science teachers to drop their classes and signatures from the music teachers to add their classes. And nobody remembers signing anything. So if I'm completely honest, that should have been a huge sign. But I was young and dumb. Kids have heard me say that when I was young and dumb from time to time. And so I was mad. How dare someone change this? And so I went and got signatures from all the music teachers and dropped all those classes, all the signatures from the science teachers to add the classes back, then went down to the administration building, got it all filed, and had my file transferred. And about a week later, I came to my senses and thought, what are you doing? That's a miracle. No other way can you explain that. And so then I had to undo everything again. Yeah. So, in my life there, God had a plan. So even though I was now a music major and still a fairly pitiful saxophonist at the time, I kept my foot in the science world, and I continued to take classes. And one class I took was really fun, actually. It was called Natural Vertebrate History. On Sundays, we would have labs, and we would go out and we would look for venomous snakes. We would look for these huge salamanders about 2 feet long called hellbenders. And the teacher would tell us, just shove your hand where you can't see it in this dark, slimy hole. Oh, nothing will get you. It'll be fine. And if you feel something really slimy, grab onto it really hard and pull it out. And of course, we did it. Yeah, we did it. We didn't know any better. I was like, I got it. It's this huge, ugly salamander. So in that class, we had to create what was called a curriculum vitae. And it's basically like a resume. And since I had done this, we were supposed to submit it to a representative from the Southern Conference. And I didn't want to. I can't remember why at the time, but I was being a stinker. I was grumpy and didn't want to be bothered. So I walked into where these officials were. I rudely tossed it on the person's desk, and I walked out without a word. Now, I hadn't done any student teaching yet, and I really didn't plan on doing any teaching. I knew I wanted to study music. I took music ed because I figured, well, I can always make a living, I guess, if I have to teach kids. Fine, I will. I see tongues being looked out at me. But again, I was young and dumb and didn't know any better. I did my student teaching and had a wonderful time. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Now, they have since changed this, which I think is wonderful. I think you should get young teachers into the classroom as freshmen. You should get them in as quickly as possible and not wait till they're a senior and they might decide this is really not for me and you're stuck. So I did my student teaching at public schools. It was down in Georgia, and I worked at 4 different public schools and had a wonderful time. And I thought, hey, this music thing, teaching kids, is actually a lot of fun, and I'm halfway decent at it. This might be an idea. Well, one day as I was coming back from one of my schools, a person ran up to me and they said, hey, you really have to talk to Dr. Haynes. There's an emergency. So I was panicking at the time thinking, oh no, is a family member hurt? I didn't know what was going on. So I ran and I found Dr. Hayes, burst into her office. What's wrong? What's going on? And she says, hey, you want to go to Guam? I blinked a whole lot and Guam? I don't want to go to Guam. What's in Guam? What's Guam? And she explained to me another curious instance. You remember the curriculum vitae that I tossed onto the desk of the person and rudely walked out? Well, they should have balled it up and thrown it away, but they didn't. They filed it away, and then sometime later, this person was talking with another friend of theirs who worked in the South Asia Pacific Division, and they were just shooting the breeze, no real official anything they were talking about, and just at the end of the conversation, the guy in the South Asia Pacific Division said, we have a high school on the island of Guam Adventist Academy, and we're looking for someone to teach music, and we're looking for someone to teach science. And the person from the Southern Conference reached over into their files and they pulled out a curriculum vitae and they said, I have someone who might fill both bills. Church, God had a plan. So there I am on the island and I'm fresh out of school, and I think all of you would probably say when you're fresh out of school and you actually get to doing what you were trained to do, that whole first year you're unlearning a lot of things and seeing how things work in the real world. Well, I had that as a new teacher. I also had replaced a very popular music teacher. He was well liked by the kids. He ran a quality program. However, he decided to start his own school, and he took half of the student body, and he took quite a few of the teachers as well and formed his own school. So here I come, fresh out of school, ready to take on the world, and ran into a hornet's nest. The first year was really tough. It was really, really tough, not only for me, but for all of the teachers who came there. However, God blessed, and over the years, we kind of got some kinks worked out, rebuilt the trust in the community, and things were going really, really well. About the end of the 4th year, my wife and I decided, we're really enjoying eternal summer. We're enjoying the palm trees. I would call my mother on Christmas Eve and watch the moon rise up out of the ocean. And I'm sitting there in shorts by a palm tree eating mangoes and just having a high old time. But I began to get the itch to come back. Well, we sent out a bunch of resumes and hadn't heard anything, not at all. Nothing came back, which was a good thing because, church, God had a plan. So my wife and I thought, well, okay, we don't have a job. We'll just continue on here. It's not all bad. You are on a tropical paradise. What we didn't know at the time is that our principal had accepted a call back east. And so he was leaving us. And we also knew that there were some other teachers on the island at the same school who stayed because the Neelys were staying. And had we gotten our jobs, my friends would have accepted a call that they had, and then you have the principal leaving, and so there goes half of the teaching body. And once again, that school, which we had worked so hard to get fixed and to get it back on the right path, would have blown up, and new teachers would have had to deal with it all over again. Church, God had a plan. My 5th year, I learned to scuba dive on the island. And by that time, I had become an advanced diver, probably had about 100 dives under my belt. I particularly enjoyed night dives. And sometimes people would say, well, you can't see what's coming to eat you. Do you really want to be out there in the dark? And my thought was, well, I can't really see it. And so in my mind, it's not there, okay? It reminds me of a children's story, actually, where a shark was following us at night, but I didn't know it. A fairly large shark, but I digress. So my dive buddy, the guy we went diving with a lot, he called me up one day and he says, "Hey, Neely, you want to go diving?" I'm like, "Yeah, twist my arm. Let's go." The trick is that he had some family members who were visiting the island. They were only there for a couple days, and he was going to take them out on the boat. So we got out on the boat, and we did our first dive, and then we came back, and we were off-gassing on the boat. That sounds bad. Let me explain. So what happens is, as you're scuba diving, you're breathing the compressed air, but you're also building up nitrogen in your blood. And if you're not careful, just like if you take a soda, a 2-liter, and you open it and all the fizz comes bursting out, well, that can happen in your body, which is never a good thing. So what you do is you just give a break between your next dive, and your dive computer tells you how much time you need to be out of the water before you can go dive again. And so there I am waiting there, and these two people started talking to me, and their name were Dick and Anita Molstead. Some of you know who they are. I see a lot of nodding heads. And they said, "Hey, so we've heard some good things about you. You should consider sending a resume to Oregon." Oregon? I don't want to go to Oregon. What's in Oregon? I don't want to go there at all. And they said, "Well, just never know. Just send in a resume." So they left, and my wife and I began filling out new resumes as we're getting closer toward the end of the 5th year. And we sent them out, and I particularly remember the Oregon resume was the one that was a real pain because you couldn't just type it up. They gave us this form, and it explicitly said to put all of your information in the little boxes. And this was before the Lord blessed us with Word, and we had typewriters. And I remember I was sitting in the school's library, and I'm trying to reel it through and line it up so it snaps just right, and I'm grumbling and trying to get it there, and these people from Oregon, I'm grumbling, and mailed it off. A week or two later, our new principal there, Murray Cooper, he said, "Hey, by the way," he just passed me as I was walking to my next class. He says, "By the way, I got a phone call. You might be getting a call from a principal back east." "Oh, okay." Back stateside, rather. "Okay, fine." Well, the next morning, I got a phone call, and it was from a person who's sitting here in this room right now, Bob McDonald, gave me a phone call. I don't know if Bob knows this, but when he called me, he said, "So, you should just be about ready to head off to school." I wasn't. I was still laying in bed. I don't think he's probably spoken to a teacher that way before, a future teacher. So I was laying there, and of course I pretended, "Hi, good morning." And he was right. I should have been getting ready for school, but the school was just right around the corner, and I figured, well, I had a little extra time. And so he talked to me about a music position at Portland Adventist Elementary School. I'd never heard of the school. And so we set up a time to discuss my future and possibly a job opportunity. So I talked to Bob a little while later, and long story short, he offered me the job, and my wife and I accepted, and that brought us here, which is pretty cool. Well, when I came back here, I'm not too far. I wasn't too far away from a second degree. So what I decided to do was to take some additional classes. Now, math is a perishable skill. It is. Unless you sit around and spend a lot of time doing algebra, you begin to forget. And as I was taking these science classes, I needed to bone up on my math a little bit, and so I took some additional math classes to help these science classes go a little more smoothly. However, church, God had a plan. Little did I know, as I was taking these math classes, a short while later, I would be called into the principal's office, never a good thing. And I sat down, and Bob looked me in the eye, and he said, "How do you feel about teaching math?" "Oh, well, I feel pretty good, actually. I've been taking math, and sure, no problem." And he had me begin to teach middle school math. I've been doing it now maybe 11 years. A lot of those kiddos over there I taught. And what struck me is 2 years before Bob asked me to teach those classes, God got me into math classes. And it was no real thing. I mean, I already had my degree. I was already working. I have 2 minors and endorsements in multiple things. It was just something I had a small urge to do, but I believe that that was not through coincidence. I believe that was God's urging. God was preparing me for work that I didn't know that was going to be needed just yet. And so the good Lord had me ready for it. God had a plan. Now, church, as I prepared for this, I discovered a couple things. First, believing in God and trusting God are two different things. There are many people who believe there's a God somewhere, somehow. There's a God. Sure, I believe in God. But the idea that we believe that he has a plan for our life, that we should trust him with it when we don't see the end outcome, that's where it becomes really difficult. And if I'm honest, there are times that I'm fearful about the future. There are times that I am filled with doubt. And I would bet many of you right now sitting here have other things that are weighing on your soul. But one reason we come to church, it is not just to sing or listen to the bells or to hear children's story. It is to be reminded that God is still busy. God is still active. God cares about our lives. He cares about our day-to-day. And that's how we are reassured. I love sitting here and hearing people give testimonies up front. It's a powerful, powerful thing to hear someone's testimony. And so what I want you to know this morning is that when Satan begins working on you, when your faith is shaky, when you're wondering, God, is anybody home? You're calling and I'm praying and nothing's happening. I want you to remember the times that God has worked in my life, and I hope that they will be a blessing to you. And know that even though you can't see the future, you don't know what's coming, church, God has a plan for each of you.